In August 1958, inside America's most feared prison, 5 guards surrounded one man. He was 53 years old, outnumbered, trapped, and they didn't just want to punish him. They wanted to break him. But what happened next shocked everyone watching, because instead of begging, instead of crying, Bumpy Johnson smiled. And that smile triggered one of the most brutal beatings in Alcatraz history, a moment so shocking prisoners would still whisper about it decades later. This isn't a story about crime. This isn't even a story about prison. This is a story about dignity. This is the day Alcatraz tried and failed to break Bumpy Johnson. By 1958, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another inmate. He was already a legend. In Harlem, his name carried weight, not because he was flashy, he wasn't, but because he was sharp, calculated, and fearless. He had gone toe-to-toe with white mob bosses like Dutch Schultz and survived. He played chess with Lucky Luciano. He read poetry in his spare time, quoted Shakespeare, spoke calmly, thought deeply. But more than anything, Bumpy commanded respect. Not through fear, but through presence. Even people who hated him admitted one thing. Bumpy Johnson walked like a man who refused to bow. That's what made him dangerous to people who believed power only came from fists, guns, or badges. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz, he was already older. His body wasn't what it once was, but his mind, still razor-sharp, still unbreakable. And that's what made certain guards hate him. By 1958, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another inmate. He was already a legend. In Harlem, his name carried weight. Not because he was flashy, he wasn't, but because he was sharp, calculated, and fearless. He had gone toe-to-toe with white mob bosses like Dutch Schultz and survived. He played chess with Lucky Luciano. He read poetry in his spare time, quoted Shakespeare, spoke calmly, thought deeply. But more than anything, Bumpy commanded respect. Not through fear, but through presence. Even people who hated him admitted one thing. Bumpy Johnson walked like a man who refused to bow. That's what made him dangerous to people who believed power only came from fists, guns, or badges. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz, he was already older. His body wasn't what it once was, but his mind, still razor-sharp, still unbreakable. And that's what made certain guards hate him. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was psychological warfare. Cold wind, isolation, concrete walls, constant surveillance, silence that messed with your head. And guards who believed cruelty wasn't abuse, it was discipline. Officially, Alcatraz wasn't segregated, but unofficially, race dictated everything. Black inmates were expected to be quiet, submissive, grateful, not respected, not intellectual, not dignified. But Bumpy didn't fit that mold. He walked the yard upright, he made eye contact, he spoke calmly, he played chess, he read books, he debated ideas, he didn't flinch, and worst of all, other prisoners respected him. Black prisoners, white prisoners, violent offenders, non-violent ones, didn't matter. When Bumpy spoke, people listened. That made him a threat. Not because he was violent, but because he refused to shrink. And to certain guards, especially racist ones, that was unacceptable. By the summer of 1958, 5 guards had fixated on Bumpy. Their names were Michael Sullivan, Patrick O'Brien, James Morton, Richard Hayes, Daniel Cooper. They weren't rookies. They weren't impulsive. They were angry. Angry that a black man carried himself with dignity. Angry that prison hadn't broken him. Angry that other inmates respected him. And over several weeks they started talking, not officially, not on record, but in break rooms, hallways, guard stations. One of them reportedly said, "That needs to be reminded who runs this place." Another said, "We're going to break him in front of everyone." They didn't want discipline. They wanted humiliation. They wanted Bumpy begging, crying, broken. They wanted to erase the man he used to be, right in front of 120 witnesses. And on August 14th, 1958, they decided it was time. It was 2:47 p.m. Recreation period. About 120 prisoners were in the yard, walking, talking, exercising, playing cards. Bumpy stood near the north wall, talking quietly with 2 inmates about books and chess strategies. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just conversation. Then the 5 guards approached, not casually, not spread out, together, purposeful. Several inmates noticed immediately. Something was wrong. Officer Michael Sullivan reached Bumpy first. He stepped directly into his space, close enough that Bumpy could smell his breath. "Move, boy," Sullivan said. "Not sir, not inmate, not Johnson. Boy," a word designed to strip grown black men of adulthood, of authority, of humanity. "This area's for whites only," Sullivan said. "You and your friends move to the other side." That wasn't true. The yard wasn't segregated, never had been. This wasn't policy. This was dominance. Bumpy looked at him calmly. "This area isn't whites only," he said. "I have as much right to stand here as anyone. I'm not moving based on your racial preferences. No anger, no fear, just facts." The yard went quiet. Two inmates beside Bumpy shifted like they were about to step forward. Bumpy raised one hand and subtly, signaling them to stay back. This was his. Sullivan's face tightened. "I said move," he repeated louder. "You gonna move like a good or do we need to teach you a lesson?" Bumpy didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. He just stood there, relaxed, upright, present. And that's when Sullivan shoved him, hard, both hands into Bumpy's chest. Bumpy stumbled backward into the wall, nearly fell, caught himself, straightened, and returned to the exact spot he'd been standing. And then Bumpy smiled, not a happy smile, not a mocking smile, a calm one, a smile that said, "I see you, I understand you, and you're not breaking me." That smile lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it shattered something inside Sullivan. Sullivan snapped. "You think this is funny?" he yelled. "I'm gonna beat that smile off your face." And without warning, he punched Bumpy in the face, hard, left cheekbone. Blood exploded instantly. Bumpy staggered, didn't fall, wiped blood off his face with the back of his hand, looked at it, then looked back at Sullivan. Same calm expression. Patrick O'Brien rushed in from the side, 2 against 1. Bumpy ducked one punch, grabbed O'Brien's arm, used his momentum, and threw him off balance. O'Brien hit the concrete hard for maybe 2 seconds. It was just Bumpy and Sullivan. Bumpy punched Sullivan in the stomach, not hard enough to seriously injure, but hard enough to prove something. He wasn't prey. But then Morton, Hayes, Cooper, all rushed in, 5 against 1. Morton swung his nightstick into Bumpy's kidneys. Pain exploded through his body. Bumpy dropped to one knee. Hayes kicked him in the ribs. Cooper grabbed his hair, yanked his head back. Sullivan started punching him again, repeatedly, straight to the face. Blood poured from his nose, from above both eyes, from his mouth. One eye started swelling shut, then the other. They knocked him to the ground. Kicks rained down on his ribs, his back, his legs. Nightsticks slammed into his shoulders, his spine, his arms when he tried to protect his head. The yard froze. 120 prisoners watched. No one intervened, not because they didn't want to, but because attacking guards meant riots, lockdowns, beatings, possibly death, so they watched. And they remembered. 4 minutes. 4 minutes that felt like hours. 4 minutes that burned into Alcatraz history. By the end, Bumpy's face didn't even look human. Both eyes swollen shut, nose clearly broken. Blood soaked his uniform. His breathing was labored, broken ribs. He couldn't stand, could barely move. Sullivan stood over him, panting. "Had enough, Johnson," he said. "You ready to be a good Nookie now? You ready to admit white men run this prison?" The yard was silent. Every inmate waited. Would Bumpy break? Would he beg? Would he surrender his dignity just to stop the pain? He lay there for about 10 seconds. Then, slowly, painfully, he raised his head, turned toward Sullivan, blood dripping from his mouth, broken teeth, swollen face, and said, "Gentlemen, you hit like boys." Silence, absolute silence. Nobody spoke, nobody moved, because nobody could believe what they'd just heard. A 53-year-old man, beaten nearly to death, had just insulted his attackers, had just told 5 grown men that their best effort wasn't enough. Sullivan's face went white, then red. He lifted his nightstick, high, aimed at Bumpy's skull. That blow could have killed him, but Officer Hayes grabbed his arm mid-swing. "That's enough," Hayes said. "We made our point. If you kill him, there'll be an investigation." Sullivan wanted to finish it, wanted Bumpy begging, but Hayes was right. Too many witnesses, too public, too risky. "Get him to the infirmary," Hayes ordered. "Tell the doctor it was a yard altercation." Inmate resisted, required force. 2 guards who hadn't participated brought a stretcher, lifted Bumpy's barely conscious body. As they carried him through the yard, something strange happened. Every inmate stood. Not because guards told them to, but because they were showing respect. One inmate whispered, "They beat his body, but they couldn't touch his soul." Dr. Samuel Morrison had worked at Alcatraz for 12 years. He'd seen everything: stabbings, suicide attempts, broken bones. But when Bumpy Johnson came in, even he paused. "Jesus Christ," Morrison muttered. "What happened to him?" "Yard altercation," a guard said. "Resisted." Morrison didn't believe it. He'd seen too many altercations that looked exactly like this. But he also knew better than to challenge guards, so he focused on the damage, and the damage was brutal. Broken nose, displaced cartilage, both eyes swollen shut, 6 stitches above the left eye, 4 above the right, 8 inside the mouth, 3 broken teeth, jaw possibly fractured, at least 3 broken ribs, severe bruising across kidneys and back, internal bleeding risk, pain medication barely touched it. Bumpy never screamed, never begged, never complained. He just lay there, silent, still, unbroken. This story isn't about whether Bumpy Johnson was a criminal. This story isn't about whether prison guards had authority. They did. This story is about something deeper. It's about what happens when power meets dignity. Those guards thought power came from fists, from uniforms, from batons, from being able to hurt someone who couldn't fight back. But Bumpy showed them something they couldn't understand. That real power is refusing to surrender who you are, even when you're bleeding, even when you're broken, even when you're alone. They wanted him crying. He smiled. They wanted him begging. He insulted them. They wanted him humiliated. He left legendary. Bumpy Johnson didn't walk out of that beating victorious. He walked out injured, scarred, in pain. But spiritually, they lost. Because decades later, no one remembers those guards. No one remembers their names. But everyone remembers the man who got beaten nearly to death and still said, "Gentlemen, you hit like boys." This is Bumpy Johnson decoding dark history, and this was the day Alcatraz tried and failed to break Bumpy Johnson.